Right.
Okay, so I was saying that I was not giving myself permission to feel truly or acknowledge how walking with other people through trauma was impacting me. And so recognizing that secondary trauma is real and it does impact you. And so I had to take a month off of work and just spend time focusing on myself and just healing and recovering and recognizing that I had a lot of work to do, shifting to receive care and not just constantly be giving care. And COVID was also another thing that kind of slapped me in the face with that of like, I didn't have anything to offer. But when my community starts to show up for me and on my front door and kids are like waving, dropping off vitamin C and like making big cards and things, it was just this picture of this is what I've been saying is like, it's about these mutual relationships. It's about being together in community. But I hadn't fully received that as far as me receiving care. And so I'm used to being the one that people go to for help or to solve problems or to talk about things, but to say, oh, like I have to give myself space to actually grieve with people and not just like, I gotta keep pushing through, and it's hard because it shouldn't be, but death is so normalized, right? Trauma, violence is so normalized that it's just another day. Like even just this week, the amount of things that we're like, yeah, this is just another day in the life. And so you keep going and it's like, how do we pause and say, this is normal for our community, but it shouldn't be normal and it's not normal.
That's right.
And so how do we pause to say that and not just like push through? So yeah, that's been a process.
That's interesting. And Ms. Carly, so you were saying something about the secondary trauma.
Yeah. Would you think that secondary trauma is similar to secondhand smoke? You don't know you have it until you have it.
It's like really, I think I'm going to use that example in training from now on because it is, you don't realize, and it's embodied too. And that's the thing. We think, oh, it's just the smoke in the air. It's nothing. But it is actually physically changing your biology. And so recognizing that as well, that's like with recognizing my cortisol levels were so high, my body couldn't recover from sickness because my hormones were so out of whack. And so it's just simple things like that but we get so it's so normal to be living in extreme stress for our community that no one looks around and is like, hey, we're not okay, it's just like you got to keep pushing. And so to pause and say like, we're not okay,
and that's okay.
Yeah, and it's
that's right.
that it's
that's right.
I around this time right before or right after, I think I came back from taking like a month off and sitting in my office doing a little Zoom call. Like I think I was actually doing a training on trauma for somebody, and like all of a sudden I realized like I pull my headphones off and I'm like, that sounds really loud out the window, like what's going on? And then I had to like hit the floor and like gunshots were like, it was bad. And so I walk outside and like crowds are trying to gather, somebody's gotten shot, and I just like sat there and I was like, we are all completely numb. Like I don't have anything to offer anybody because like this is just another guy shot, another day. And I just sat there and I was like, I'm not okay. Like, and I was talking with some community members about that. Like, we're numb. Like, this is not okay. Does anybody recognize we're numb? And everybody's like, yeah. And just in that situation, like, I knew the boy that shot him. We knew the guy that was shot. It was over like $1 in a dice game. It was just like absurd. Like, and so just like the mental toll of like trying to reconcile like that this life matters and that it can be taken so easily, and just in the midst of that, all of these arguments, nationwide political games about guns, and just being like, it's easier for our kids to get their hands on a weapon than a new textbook, and like just that being infuriating, and like just the mental toll that takes, and just trying to say, how do I engage in the world outside of my community to like help bring education on like these aren't abstract conversations, like it's impacting real kids and my kids, right? And like our life, and just like where it's just normal background noise is gunshots, and again, it's so normal. Like I had friends over one day and like we're chilling in the backyard, got a fire going or something, and like there's gunshots, and they were like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And I was like, oh, it's fine. And they're like, no, that's not normal. I'm like, that is normal. And I'm like, oh, it's not normal. Just that kind of thing. Like,
Correct.
people
That's
don't
right.
understand. They live in their happy little bubble, and it's easy to dismiss. And like, people don't go to Gate City unless they're like intentional. You don't accidentally, right? Like, and it's designed that way. It is designed where it can be avoided. And so just acknowledging that and saying, what does it mean to choose to step into it and to bear witness and to be with, and to say, we're going to still show up. And then how do you have boundaries to like do the work well and be able to keep showing up. And so
that's actually the other part of it, and this is why this podcast is so aptly named Heartworks, because you don't go into the kind of work that we go into and not have your heart exposed, made vulnerable, or even broken. I can relate in different ways to everything you're saying, and here's my follow-up to that for you. How do you feel about de-stress, and how do you de-stress? How do you bring it full circle so you can continue to do that work? How do you make that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly still learning. Something you just said, a quote came to mind, and I'm going to butcher it, and I don't remember who said it. So, y'all look it up later. But something about like, there are some things you can't see clearly unless it's through tears. And so for me, it's been learning, like, I do have to cry. Like, I do have to, I have to give myself space to grieve. And so a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, and then breaks outside. Half of our staff live within a mile of the community as well. So we're all kind of right there. And so that adds another thing. Like, we truly are part of the community. And so it is this we together. But you don't necessarily get a break, and you're in it hardcore. And some people who've lived in the community and then now have joined us on staff, they're already living there. They know what they're stepping into. But then, like, from their perspective of going, like, oh, y'all are walking with so many people. Like, it's hard living out here, but when you're carrying everybody's stories, they're like multiple, like, hit in the face with grief, like, multiple times a day. And so it's like, how do you give yourself space for that? And so as a leader of the team, like, I really try to create space where we can talk about these things, where team members know that they have freedom to say, hey, I need a mental health day. Like, yesterday was really hard, or hey, that was a lot, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. And so there's just a lot of freedom like that. We're not like counting how many sick days you have on that, because
you recognize what they're dealing with.
You have to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Correct.
And so and then just finding things like, again, we are not a ministry that's like super caught up on like the stats and like we're not driven by like numbers and results in that. It's hey, this is really hard, so what is something that we can do together as a community that we enjoy? And so and how can, as we learn about things like the therapeutic aspects of art, how can we bring that in and do it together as a community? When we realized, man, Ruffner is right in our backyard. But when I first came to Oak Tree and I had some kids, they were like, let's do something today, Miss Raquel. I was like, y'all want to go hike? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, great. So I threw them in my car. I was like, we're going hiking, bye. And Mom's like, cool, see y'all later. And I pull up at Ruffner and they go, what are we doing? And I was like, we're going to go hiking. And they were like, what's hiking? And I was like, oh yeah, you don't know that word. And I was like, so it's like, they didn't care. They're just like, get me out, right? Like, that's right. I want something to do today. And so it was just so funny, but hiking is now a regular part of our activities together as a community. And anytime parents go, they're like, can I go next time? Like, because it's right there. But again, when we talk about access, if you don't have a car and you don't know the word hiking, like those things, and just the history of woods and everything in our community, like that's hard. And so how do we be a part of like redeeming that and saying like, no, you deserve to have access to fresh air and peace and quiet as well. And so
how has being trauma informed and like just being in the community period help you all to provide services differently? But you talked about building relationships, so how did that help build that trust?
Just even recognizing like the majority of trauma comes through relationship, and so healing is going to come through relationship. And what does it mean to be trustworthy of that process for someone to like walk with you in that. And so for us, we're really intense on asking volunteers to commit. We don't just have people come in for like one-off projects, you know, very often. If they do, it's like to fix something on our property or something like that, or that we know like we're going to have a long-term relationship, because people walking in and out, that again, it furthers trauma. And so, and just that perspective of a lot of times, again, Birmingham has such a like generous, like there are so many nonprofits, there's so many churches that want to do good and want to help people, but we take the approach of like, hey, you can actually do harm when you're trying to help if you're not actually in mutual relationship. And when we're just seeing people as projects, when we're just like, oh, I want to do charity and feel good, we say like, hey, that's not a good enough reason, like, because you're making it about you. And so it has to be centered from this viewpoint of justice, of it is not right that our community looks like this. The history that created these disparities is not right. And so it gives us a different approach when we enter in, because that's humility and with like repentance, like of how do we repair what has been ruined and what has been so destructive. What does it look like for us to be a part of restoring together? And that has to come through relationship, because the history is this brokenness, this othering, this these levels of racism, of who's better, and it's economic as well. And so for our community, you know, like a lot of times it's easier for me, even though I'm white, to make a relationship because I have a lower income background, and so I relate a lot more than somebody who might be black, but they're still on the other side of the mountain, you know, and they come in and people are like, I don't want to talk to you. And so that's been interesting, even just conversations with churches in our community of just what that looks like. And so just, you know, it's all the levels of caste and classism.
Were y'all like well received when you first came to the community? Because sometimes it can kind of be like,
I will say, so there's a history of Oak Tree before me. I'm not the founder. And so the beauty though is that Oak Tree was birthed out of multiple churches coming together from the start. And so Ambassadors for Christ, that's right next to us still. I think somebody else just bought the church, but Ambassadors for Christ Church in the community, Household of Faith in Eastlake, and then the Church of Brook Hills, which is over the mountain, you know, affluent white church more, came together from the start to do this like Sunday Bible club. And so it was never like this one person or like the white savior on their own. And so I'm really grateful to step into that, where, and the city pastor, Brook Hills, Keith Stanley, had a different approach of like going to the leaders and the elders in the community already and saying like, can we support, and had this justice mindset of what does it look like for us to say, hey, we have resources, how do we empower you as a church that's already in the community? But that does not mean there were not a ton of mistakes along the way, and a lot of culture clash, and a lot of just that so like I shared a little bit, I had a perspective of cross-cultural ministry from the start, of learning, like I grew up, both sides of my grandparents were in ministry in different ways. My parents were in ministry. And so like my dad like lived in Jamaica for a while, my grandparents lived in South Africa, so I always had this cross-cultural like story and history, and I went to school in Bessemer, so it was more diverse. Like I didn't realize until I got to Oak Tree like that was unique as a white person, as I'm sitting there with like, again, some of my wonderful founders and teammates when I came on staff, and like she said something about like, hey, do you know what a dollar bill and a shirt means? And I was like, I mean, yeah, what do you mean? It's a birthday. And she's like, how do you know that? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, she's like, that's a black thing. I was like, what? And I was like, I didn't know that was a black thing. Like, we all did that, you know? And so I realized, like, again, that it's not anything like I was great and came in and fixed things, but I just had a different perspective of having a more diverse childhood than most people. And so I'm really grateful for that. And again, coming from a low income family that was, you know, has been moving through that, like I'm first generation to graduate from college. So I know, like, I didn't know what I was doing. And if it weren't for people at my church, like helping me get through that, like I wouldn't have graduated. I didn't even want to go to college, y'all. And so just like I just had a different viewpoint of like what success is than what most people who come in to like fix the hood, you know, like
Yeah.
it's more like, okay, like it's not fair that kids are living this way. There's zero reason in the United States
Correct.
and in Alabama, the quote Bible Belt, that there should be these disparities, right? And so for
Very
me,
Mm-hmm.
I always had that perspective of like just wrestling from a young age, like, okay, I'm growing up hearing all these different churches say this stuff, but I'm not seeing y'all necessarily live it out. Like, if Jesus is who you say he is, like, then our city shouldn't look like this, right? And so, like, that kind of perspective of wrestling through things. I don't even know what the original question was. I'm just preaching now. Sorry, I'm gonna stop.
Well, let's just I want to ask you, what advice would you give somebody if they wanted to start a nonprofit similar in a very underserved area, and in an area that's dangerous, like Casey?
Yeah. You got to show up and be with the community a long time before you get there. Don't go in with your idea of what you're going to start a nonprofit, like, unless you're there listening and walking with people. And so, again, that was, the Bible Club was around for 2 or 3 years before different people from that, different churches, from different volunteers, community members that were doing that for the kids came together and said, we want to do more. And so then Oak Tree was birthed out of that. And so the beauty, again, is it wasn't like this one founder who, this is my baby and I have all the right answers. It was from the start. So it's gotta be with other people and with the community, and not, so, you know, like, we're a part of Christian Community Development Association, which has this mindset of like, you're going to do things with the community, but what they suggest is like, go in for 5 years just to live and be before you do anything. And so you're learning, you're asking, you are, and so that's just, again, when we're saying like, hey, what should Oak Tree do next, we're doing that as a collective.